Hi, my name is Maggie, and I work at ThinkSelf. I am the community engagement advocate here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we are very excited to be working with Heath today.
Hello.
Hi. You want to talk about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I can do that. My name is Heath Foken. I work in the deaf-blind, hard of hearing department. I'm a community engagement and health advocate there. I'm really excited to be working with Maggie here today.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that where you work, Family Tree Clinic, we abbreviate it FTC. That's also in St. Paul, Minnesota. So yeah, I'm really happy that you're able to join us today. So I'll give a little bit of a description of what ThinkSelf is first. We have two programs. We have an adult education program as well as an advocacy program focusing on domestic violence and sexual assault, DVSA. That's our advocacy focus. And yeah, we cover the entire state of Minnesota with our services.
Awesome. Yeah, at Family Tree Clinic, we also have a wonderful program. We teach sexual health. It's actually the only organization in the country who provides sexual health education to deaf folks. We also have a clinic, and we can answer health questions and sexual health questions. It's awesome. And we also provide the service to all residents in the state of Minnesota who need it.
Yeah, and you said you're the only one nationwide just for the deaf community. Is that what you mean? Oh, okay.
Yeah, yep.
Wow, very cool. Very cool. Great. Well, today we wanted to talk about how to talk with your kids about consent and body autonomy. So this project we are working on together, along with other deaf agencies around the country. And it kind of ties into Sexual Assault Awareness Month, SAAM, which actually happened just this past April, but and now it's May, but that's okay. We obviously this is an ongoing year-round important issue to keep discussing and getting out in the community. Okay, you want to advance the slide?
And today we're going to talk about 6 different things throughout this little presentation. And it's not a line by line agenda. This is going to be more of a conversation with Maggie and myself. It's going to be low key. Oh, excuse, my cat decided to show up. They love coming into our Zoom meetings.
That's fine. Hi.
Great, thanks.
So maybe you can talk about why is it important to ask your child for permission?
Yeah, exactly. Why is it important? Um, Really, kids need to know that their body is theirs, and they need to know that all touch is consensual. And that can actually start in infancy. When you have a baby, you can ask them first if they're ready to get their diaper changed. And as they grow, they're learning that their body is theirs, that consent is vital, instead of, I mean, often a lot of parents will say, hey, go hug your grandma and grandpa, go give them a hug. And some kids might not feel into that. They might not feel ready, but their parents encourage it. And, when a kiddo says no, if they're not ready for that kind of a touch, we've got to accept that. And those lessons throughout the day, throughout the life, teach consent, and it's something that's built into their daily life. So just don't pressure them. Also, parents can use consent with dressing themselves, like, hey, do you want help getting your clothes on this morning? And if a kiddo says no, that's fine. You can leave them, or you can let them play for a little bit and then ask them again later. And if you can say, hey, are you ready for me to help change your clothes now? And maybe they'll say yes at the time, but just keep emphasizing always to respect their own body and have consent, and that they have the power in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd add too, it's important in general, in, any communication, to start as start with babies, in infancy, like you said, because language acquisition happens during that time. So it's critical to start teaching all of those things, healthy communication with your kids, even as a baby.
Yeah, that's an awesome example for sure, especially with deaf-blind, hard of hearing kids, lots of language deprivation there. So just communicate early
Yep.
and let your child know that it's their own body.
Yeah, definitely. I know you had mentioned before that, sometimes with, like, let's say grandma and grandpa, right? Oh, go give grandma and grandpa a hug, right? And the kids might say no. And then of course grandma and grandpa might end up, making one of those kind of mopey faces, right? But and that can be frustrating, when that happens. I know that. Again, like you mentioned, it's important though for the kid to know that it's their own body and they have, rights to their own choices. You don't want anybody to feel, pressured or not feel good about themselves.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. That's a definitely important part of this conversation.
Yeah. And so let's talk about why it's important to use correct terminology.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's important because often people think um, that just saying private parts or other kind of words like a peepee or other parts or other terms for their private parts are acceptable, but then they're not learning to talk about all parts of their body. And then they might go to an appointment with a doctor or they're talking to the parents or saying, oh, something hurts down there. And the parents aren't going to know how to help them. And the kiddo's not going to understand how to advocate for themselves. If a kid can say, hey, my penis hurts, a parent can help them. And so it's really important to say that's your vulva, that's your vagina or your penis. And so kiddos know, they're learning other parts of their body. They know what their nose and their ear is. And it could kind of create shame and embarrassment if you're neglecting to teach them all parts of your body, especially your private parts. So it's important to name it. And that's just going to be more healthy for the future too.
Yeah. Plus, you don't want kids to be embarrassed, right? I mean, that ends up kind of sticking with them through their whole life, right? If you make that an embarrassing thing. So yeah, definitely important to use the correct words.
Yep.
So can you give me an example of what boundaries look like? What does consent and boundaries look like in children?
Sure, that's another great question. I mean, often people don't realize that they can use consent and boundaries with even a young kid. Like maybe there's brothers or sisters that they're roughhousing, and somebody might feel uncomfortable with that, or there's just other kind of just roughhousing going on. And you can say, hey, you're not respecting my body. And you can teach the kiddos that to say no and that it should be respected. And that is a boundary. Like, I don't like that kind of touch, so please respect it. And instead of that ongoing ask or that ongoing touch, really learning how to stick to a boundary or going up to a kiddo and giving them a big embrace when they're not ready. So teaching them that it's important to be asked when their body is touched. Like, hey, can I give you a hug right now? And if the kiddo says no, you can wait 5 minutes or you can just say skip it for the day. So teaching your kid to make sure that other people are asking to touch their body appropriately to give them a hug and that they can do the same. And that's a really, really great way to start kind of building the ability to use consent and have boundaries. A lot of kids aren't going to feel comfortable with that. So it's really, really important to talk about it when they're young, both boundaries and consent.
Yeah, I think it's funny, today in the day of COVID-19, right? People have really started being like, can I give you a hug? Which is cool. That's nice. I mean, it's sad,
Exactly.
right? I mean, it's sad that, like, because of COVID, that's why it had to happen. But yeah, I know that I guess I'm impressed now. People are saying, hey, is it okay if I hug you? There's kind of respecting that distance a little bit more, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's a really good point. COVID has kind of made a positive impact on the boundary conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so Can you give examples of why it's important for kids to, um, be able to tell a trusted adult and not feel like they're going to get in trouble? Like, give me an example of what that would look like.
Sure, like you had mentioned, talking about secrets. I mean, oftentimes children who are being touched or have been touched inappropriately need to have a trusted adult that they can tell. And if someone else, and if adult has told them to keep a secret, it's really, really important that you have that conversation with them in advance to say, if someone tells that to you, you can tell me or you can tell someone else. So when an adult, or if something like that happens and the child knows that language and they can say, I'm not keeping this secret is not going to be kept with me, and I know who the people are that I can tell. So it's really, really important to just emphasize again boundaries and consent with all of that. You know, who can touch you appropriately? Mom and dad. And so if you need help, who can you ask? And so, if you if they have gone to the bathroom and they need help wiping, like who can you ask for that? And who would be an appropriate person to help wipe your butt after you go to the bathroom? Like, oh, mom or any of my caregivers. And so if that happens in a different situation with someone that they don't trust or who isn't a caregiver, there's already that line of support that the kiddo knows who they can talk to. And that's so important to start at a really, really early age. So just if any uncomfortable situation comes up, the kid knows who to talk to.
Yeah, that kind of, I had a thought and then it went away. Two things that I wanted to add to that though. Yeah, you made a really good point that, oh, I know, I got it. A lot of people think that, sexual assault happens between strangers, right? That it's always a stranger. And that's really not true. It often happens from somebody that can happen too. So, um, yeah, I have a statistic that I will actually add onto the slide here with the reference of where it's from. But um, there's a statistic that says about 50%, so that's half of deaf boys and girls have experienced some kind of sexual assault in their lifetime, which is, oh, that's just a horrible statistic. And that, also kind of goes into why it's really important to explain, like, hey, if you tell me what's going on, you're not going to get in trouble. You want to make sure the kids are still learning, right, how to express themselves, and you want to make sure they know how to be able to say those things. So, you can take that opportunity to kind of talk about it now.
Yeah, that's so important. And a lot of times, yeah, kiddos aren't going to feel uncomfortable saying that. And so it's really important, again, to learn that body autonomy, anatomy, excuse me. So if someone does touch them inappropriately, the kiddo can say, they touched me here, and this is what happened. And again, like for example, when kiddo goes to a doctor appointment, the doctor is also practicing consent to say, hey, can I touch you here? Can I look at this part of your body? And again, it's just teaching the kiddo that consent is important and that they're in charge of their body. Give your kid control. Make sure that they know they're the boss of their body. And also, again, we don't want them holding secrets. And so just saying again and again, like, hey, let's talk about it. We can talk about anything.
Yeah, that's very important for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing, deaf, disabled kids, everybody. It's just so important for them too to learn as well. Yeah. Yeah, so I had a thought too. Like we've talked sometimes about like tickling, like, right, tickling seems like a really fun thing you do with a kid, right? But sometimes kids will end up kind of like obviously looking like they don't want to be tickled. They want to be done, right? And people will still do it because they think it's kind of innocuous, right? I'm just tickling you. It's no big deal. So that's a good example of why it's important to say no, right?
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, sometimes adults just think that tickling is innocent fun, but it's not. It can be very harmful. It can cause trauma and it can be triggering for life. So it's really, really important for adults and other caregivers to just respect a kiddo's body. When they say no, even if you think you're playing and having fun, you got to respect that no. And that's a boundary, and you have to respect other people's bodily consent. They are in control of it. If you're playing, if you're tickling and you have fun and a kiddo is saying no repeatedly, that's it. They have to be in control. In the future, when they're dating or they have friends or they're just out and about, or if they're asking someone to like be friends with somebody and somebody says no, they might have hard feelings. But if they have that foundation of consent and boundaries, that's going to help. They're going to help, like, have that foundation that just asking is really, really important. If they're dating in the future and somebody asks them to go on a date or ask them to do something with their body, they have to know that they feel okay saying no, that they're comfortable, that they're safe. And if they don't have that foundation, that is something that absolutely could lead to sexual assault or sexual violence. Really, no means no, and that lesson has to be learned early and often.
Definitely. Yep. Yep.
Plus, just to add, this other word, maybe, which it's like someone might be on the fence, but it's okay. Accept a maybe. If someone says maybe to you, don't pressure them. Really, it's on them to go forward with it. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Plus, you don't want the child to grow up and like if I'm just thinking, for example, like if they say no, right, and then the person starts pressuring them, and then they kind of end up kind of bending to that person's will, right? You don't want them to experience that. You want them to know that no means no.
Yeah, exactly. If you say no and someone keeps pushing you and you start to have hard feelings about it, or you don't trust yourself, or you think, gosh, am I really in control here? Yeah, or thinking, gosh, now I'm going to make unhealthy choices that I don't really want to because I'm feeling pressured.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
And also, like Maggie had talked about tickling. I mean, kiddos are always playing rough. They're just not necessarily out to get each other, but they're hitting, they're playing. And it's okay to say, hey, wait a minute, things are getting out of control. Is hitting in this situation right or wrong? Is that how you respect other people's bodies? Hopefully the kiddo would say no. So just keep emphasizing that. And it's the same with tickling. If somebody says no, you got to stop. One person said no to the other person, and a caregiver can intervene. You can say, hey, I'm noticing one person keeps saying no. Can we talk about consent for a second? And as those kiddos grow up and get older, they will embody those values, and communication is just so important. It's really, again, just ongoing.
Yeah, for sure.
Plus, teaching parents, or parents being able to teach um, consent and saying, hey, did that person or kiddo give you permission to hit them, or did that kiddo give you permission to tickle them? And so having those conversations after, and if the kiddo says no, they didn't say that I could, then talk about it. Have that conversation and saying you got to ask permission when you're touching other people's bodies, and hopefully that lesson will be ingrained in them for life.
Yep. Yeah, that actually leads really well into our next slide. Like you had just said, these things that they're learning, right? Boundaries and consent and so forth. It doesn't have to tie into sex, right? Or the body or whatever. It can be little things. It can be anything, right? But that life lesson still helps them as they're developing into adults.
Yep. And it's really good to teach consent, teach about asking permission, teach about boundaries. And so just folks know how to have that conversation, that they're, your body is your body, and how you dress, how you behave, or how other people dress or how they behave, it's theirs. They know that stuff that they have and that they own. So be intentional for when you ask permission to touch another person's body.
Yeah. I think you had told me a statistic before that was like if you teach children about consent and boundaries, there was some statistic related to that. Can you remind me?
Yeah, it's not a stat, but often, like when we teach sexual health, we're noticing that parents are kiddos' first sexuality educators. And so when you're teaching about boundaries, consent, health, anatomy, the kiddo, as they grow up, will lead to a less likely encounter with sexual violence.
Mm.
And so having that conversation and communicating early and often, teaching kids about how to say no, and having folks that they can talk to, again, not holding information for a long time, but being comfortable telling someone if something happened. There's just like much more positive thoughts about self-worth and ownership of your body.
Yeah, definitely. Thinking about again, like if you're talking with an infant, right? You're talking with the baby. You know, that will kind of improve the relationship between parents and infants, right? Parents and children as they grow up, rather than kind of making that kind of stigmatized and embarrassing.
Yeah. Some teens will say, "Oh, I don't want to talk to my parents about that." But if you start talking about to your kid when they're very, very young, that's normalized. If you're talking about body or body changes, or if something happens, and maybe it's something related to sex, all that stuff, it's really, really important to be just an open, askable parent, that your kiddo can come to you with questions and concerns and you can receive that.
Definitely. Yep. Yeah. Well, like you had mentioned before, this does tie into Sexual Assault Awareness Month for us, because if you're teaching children boundaries and consent, again, that carries over into their ability to respect others and be respected. So yeah, I think you had said they'd be less likely, right, to experience sexual violence later in their life after having these conversations as children.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we had this conversation. It was really a wonderful experience. Yeah, and hopefully more people will learn about sexual SAAM, and recognize that it's really a lifelong journey. It starts when people are babies, and it's so important to just emphasize consent so that kids feel empowered and that they are the owner of their body, and that boundaries and consent are important.
Yeah. And it's important to me too. But I don't have children myself, right? But I visit kids, I see my friends' kids, or my little cousins or whatever, and they're still learning. And I know that it's important to ask consent, right? If can I help put on your jacket or something? It's important for everyone, whether you have kids or not. So it's good for me to learn as well. Yeah.
Yep, I agree fully.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm so happy that you joined me today, Heath.
Thank you. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Thanks so much.